Thank you. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the second of the ABHI Ask the Experts webinar, where my colleagues Phil Brown and Steve Lee will be ready to answer your questions. Just so you know, have we got the second slide up, John? If you can put that one up. You will see that we're recording this this webinar, so it's there to follow up with if you want to follow up and ask the other questions, if you want to see other questions, and that includes the July event that we held as well. So the questions and the information are still valid on there. We'll come back onto other webinars that we've got for you. Please put questions that you've got into the Q&A box, and then Steve and Phil can answer those. And if you have any follow-up questions, please write to us at ukevents@abhi.org.uk and we'll endeavour to answer them. I think last time we ended up answering some questions. Can we have the next slide, please, John? Right, so let me introduce Phil Brown and Steve Lee to you. Phil, would you like to just give a quick bio on who you are and what you do?
Thank you, Andrew. Yeah, and I apologise, I'm not wearing a suit and tie today. It's Friday, dress down Friday, even though we're working at home. My name's Phil Brown. I'm the Director of Regulatory and Compliance at ABHI. I've been with ABHI for the last 6 years, working on CE and CA marking, as well as trying to deal with some of the Brexit issues that we've been facing. My life prior to ABHI included quite long industry experiences with Smith & Nephew, Genzyme Biosurgery, KCI, as well as Wright Medical, and working for a couple of small consulting companies. So all the way through that career, it has been with medical devices. So really pleased to be here this morning, Andrew, and looking forward to some really great questions.
Good. Well, we've got the first question up, so we'll come on to that in a moment. Before that, though, Steve, would you like to give your bio?
Thanks, Andrew. I have put a shirt on especially for this today. I don't normally work on Fridays at all, but I'm really pleased to be here in this session. So my name's Steve Lee. I'm Director of Diagnostics Regulation at ABHI. I've been doing this for almost 2 years now. So kind of getting to be part of the furniture in the virtual office. Before I was at ABHI, I was at MHRA for 24 years. I was leading on the IVD regulatory side there, and I was chair of the IVD regulatory group in Brussels when the IVDR was being negotiated. I have, previous to that, got a little bit of manufacturing experience and a little bit of clinical experience. I qualified as a biomedical scientist back in the day, and I'm kind of currently fellow of the IBMS and fellow of TOPRA, the Organisation for Professionals in Regulatory Affairs. So really keen on regulation, really keen on biomedical science and pathology, a complete geek when it comes to regulations. So really happy to be having a chat with Phil and Andrew and yourselves. I really want to know kind of what's going on and what is of concern. So yeah, really pleased to be here. Thanks, Andrew.
Thanks, Steve. We need geeks, so don't worry about it. Right, next slide, please, John. Right, okay, so just give you a bit more background. A common question that's come out of all the events we do. I should say that this is part of a program called HealthTech, which is funded by Innovate UK and supported by not only ABHI, but also CPI. And part of this is that we've got to address the regulatory issues. Some of that's been addressed for by the Innovate UK regulatory grants, which have been oversubscribed, and indeed they're looking to try and find more funding for that. But our role in this has been about training and providing information on what to do when. A common question that's come out of the 11 round tables that we've organised around the country. We have a bit of a regulatory roadmap here, which takes you from point number 1 in the top left, history and background, down to point 10 and beyond, to point post-market surveillance once you've got your product on the market. And each of those reference points refers to the training that we put in place, and there are webinars in place. If you want to go to the next slide, please, John. I should say that that roadmap is on the ABHI website, and you can find it at abhi.org.uk, the regulatory roadmap. And there are the first 3 additional webinars from history and background, classification and essential principles. And so that you don't have to go through listening to Phil go on about regulation every second of the day, you can actually dip in to the sections and look at the individual points. So for instance, at 2 minutes and 1 second, what does classification mean, if that's a particular point, or what are the essential principles post-market? On the 28:44 minutes in, then it's a handy reference point. And there are 2 or 3 more, I think 3 more, in fact, webinars to be posted. So keep an eye out for those. Next slide, please, John. Right, this is where I'll probably hand over. Phil, would you, or I think probably Phil to start with, if Steve, you want to add anything there, because the first question looks like you're answering, Steve. So do you want to put this in context, Phil, in terms of what we're actually looking at, where we're at this moment in time, and how things are likely to go forward from here?
Yeah, thank you, Andrew. Contextually then, as you know, as SMEs or as developers, designers, manufacturers of medical technologies, you're well aware, I'm sure, that you need to actually CA or CE mark your devices in order to place them on the market. And these here in red are the main questions which people are sort of basically asking us as we move forward through a transition period of leaving Europe, to be honest. You know, we sort of left Europe quite some time back, but the systems are still trying to sort themselves out. So we'll talk a little bit, I'm sure, about CA marking and what that actually means. But you can see on this slide here, these are the sort of the main questions that we're sort of being leveled at the moment. First of all, you know, can I still place a CE mark product on the market under MDR and IVDR? What about the old MDD and the Active Implantable Medical Device Directive and the IVD Directive? Of course, those products can still be placed on the market in Europe to a certain degree, depending on the validity of certificates. But what does that actually mean for the UK? And then lastly, what about these declarations of conformity and all of those sorts of things? What does that actually mean? So lots of these things are really sort of exercising us as we move through a date of the 30th of June 2023 and work with government and with the MHRA on the next steps of regulation. So again, these sorts of questions you will see in a number of those little webinars that Andrew has pointed to. One thing which I will say about those, Andrew, just to sort of make it clear, those webinars are not a definitive how-to type webinar. They're really just to raise the awareness of those particular aspects. We know that a lot of you are sort of thinking about CA and CE marking. You may know that there are particular milestones that you have to hit on a timeline getting to CE or CA marking, but what do I actually have to consider as I'm going through? So for example, the classification webinar will sort of introduce the aspects of classification, how it influences the rest of your strategy. So really to sort of highlight those things rather than giving you chapter and verse as to actually what classification means. Perhaps those are the sorts of questions we can get to again today, including these sorts of ones which you've got on the screen here around transition.
Andrew, you're on mute, but while you're unmuting yourself, can I just add in onto what Phil has said, particularly on that middle section? So I think that's the one that's the most difficult and the most confusing for manufacturers operating in the UK. So if you've got an MDD certificate, an AIMDD certificate, and most products above the lowest classification have certificates, you can only continue to place that on the market with a CE certificate from an EU notified body until that certificate expires. Once that certificate expires, that there is no current plan for how that product can be placed on the EU market or the UK market, unless you've got a new certificate to MDR or IVDR. From an IVD manufacturer's point of view, it's slightly different because actually only those Annex 2 and self-tests have certificates from notified bodies. The vast majority of IVDs only have a declaration of conformity. Declarations of conformity don't have expiry dates. So actually there's a glimmer of hope there because if you've got a declaration of conformity to IVDD, that you've written out yourself, you've self-declared, you can have that full, you've got the EU transition periods, but in the UK, you've got 5 years from the date of application. The date of application is currently June 23. So you can continue to place your product in the market with a valid EU declaration of conformity until 2028. Now that doesn't actually match for Class D and Class C exactly, and what we really need is a nice timeline. At the moment, we don't have any certainty, so we can't put any of this into writing. But a nice timeline for whether you're a medical device or IVD, whether you're UK or EU, and what those dates actually mean. And we're hearing date. Is there a shift in date for the MDR? Is there going to be further shifts in date for the IVDR? What are the dates? So there's lots of uncertainty, but these are the proposals. The only certainty at the moment is June 23. Lots and lots of different proposals around what will happen after that if you have a valid declaration or a valid certificate.
Right. Thanks, Steve. And thanks for reminding me I was on mute. Just taking that further on, have you actually then effectively answered the first question that we've got from S. Swana? Is the time period to accept CE mark devices in the UK formally been extended to 2028? Absolutely.
The law at the moment says the standstill period ends in June 23, and then the new regime will be mandatory from 1st of July 2023, and there's no transition built into the legislation. MHRA have proposed, and there's no reason to think that this won't happen, but it's not yet formally in law. I've proposed an extension for either 3 or 5 years, depending on, as we've seen in that slide. So we are pushing, as a trade body, we are pushing to get some kind of certainty around that. But until it's written in the law, it's not written in the law.
Got you. Okay. Right. I think that answers that question. We've got quite a detailed one, the second one from Jay Carnegie here. We're a UK distributor of medical devices. One of the products that we purchased in 2021 and have had in our warehouse, John just moved it for me, since then, from a company outside the EU and under their MDD registration. Their MDD registration has now expired, August 2022, and they are still awaiting to receive MDR accreditation. Not an unusual situation, I don't think. We have just received an order for these from a customer in the EU, and as these have already been placed on the market bracket in the UK under the MDD, is this still classified as being on the market in the EU, as we need to ensure we are not contravening regulations if we dispatch these? Phil, do you want to tackle this first off?
Well, looking at that, actually, I think that it's important to say that placing a product on the UK market is not the same as placing a product on the EU market. Since we left Europe, of course, being outside of the EU, we are a third country as far as the EU is concerned. So that would mean that unless those products have been placed on the EU market, I suspect that you wouldn't be able to supply that customer in the EU. I think the UK have some relaxed thoughts on that, but I don't think that that is reciprocated in Europe. So if that product hasn't been placed on the EU market with valid certificates, then it can't legally be sort of transferred to that customer, I wouldn't have thought.
So what you're saying is that if that was in an EU warehouse, you'd probably be okay.
If it was
If
in an
it's
EU
UK
warehouse, then yes.
that's a bit different. Yeah.
Correct.
Steve, do you want
correct.
to add anything to that?
No, I think Phil's absolutely right. The only thing I would add is that maybe it's worthwhile talking to the competent authority of the country where you want to export it to see
That's
if they
true.
would accept that under some kind of derogation.
That's right. Yeah, you're right, Steve, aren't you? Those derogations, though, are only granted nationally. So you would have to go to each one of the member states that you wanted to sell those products and on bended knee and sort of say to the competent authority, you know, this is a desperately needed product. We're still awaiting the MDR certification, and can we actually proceed with this? And you would get an approval specifically from that member state.
And I'm hearing about people who are getting those derogations, and it's not just on this is a life-saving device that's absolutely needed for this individual patient. It's about there are not enough devices on the market of this type from any manufacturer, any single manufacturer. So that there's a need for that availability of medical devices. So there's a slight shift in how competent authorities in the EU are dealing with derogations. Anecdotally.
And I always get the acronym wrong, Steve. It's something device exemption, right?
The exceptional use authorization.
Exceptional use authorization. So that's what you'd have to look for within the process, and sort of then follow those processes within country. And
just to clarify that is equivalent to what you call a derogation by a competent authority.
Yeah. And quite often it's useful to have those conversations with the distributor that you use in those countries, because of course then those discussions can be had in national language, and those distributors or those people fully understand the processes that are needed in those countries. So that's also a way that you can sort of manage that.
Is this kind of reflection on the kind of things MedTech Europe highlighted earlier in the year? I think it was in July, that there's a lot of products that are not getting to recertification or certification under MDR quickly enough, and that the competent authorities in various countries are now taking shall we say, a slightly more pragmatic view.
Yeah, very much.
And the latest MDCG kind of not guidance document, but position paper, the European Commission's Medical Device Coordination Group position paper kind of encourages competent authorities to not to allow manufacturers to delay, but to be sympathetic to where products haven't changed and there's no safety issue.
What I'll also add, I think, Andrew, is that in applying for a derogation, you should always, in your submission, say where you are and be very upfront in that submission as to where you are on your MDR transition. You know, actually make it very clear that you're not just applying for a derogation just for the sake of it. You're actually in a process. You're actually in a queue, if you like, with your notified body or whatever, and that as soon as you get that derogation, you'll be switching to your new product and blah de blah de blah. It's not just we need this this product because a customer has asked for it. You actually have to justify why, because of course the regulations have changed in Europe, and that's just the way that it is.
It's what I've heard Erica Conway say when she says, "Tell the story." You know? Or make sure they know. So if you've had to go notified body hopping through no fault of your own, then that's delayed you in getting your MDR certificate underway. But you know, if you've got that in your application, not as a sub story, but actually this is how we got here, exactly as Phil says. And I think that does a lot to help the competent authority understand where you are and why you are where you are.
Well, that definitely happened during the notified body hopping from an earlier time. That there was a pragmatic approach taken across these things. Very good point, I think. Good question to put in there. Plenty of meat on it. Jack Ozer has come up with a good one. CE mark devices can continue to be placed on the market for a further 5 years. does that include class 1 self-certified medical devices? I think you touched on this, Steve, a little earlier, but perhaps you'd like to just clarify that.
Yeah, because I don't use the expression self-certified. I use the expression self-declared because there is no certificate. So the declaration has no expiry date. And I think the UK understood what the EU didn't. And that declarations of conformity are there for people rather than who don't have certificates. So if you don't have a certificate and you're relying on your declaration does not have an expiry date, so it should be for the full length of time. Phil, I don't know if the 3-year rule applies there. There might be something that you could add to that.
I guess
you're talking the difference between diagnostic and device.
So all IVDs have got 5 years, but not all medical devices have got 5 years. And I can't remember what the distinction is.
Phil?
Yeah, and well, there are a couple of things you just have to sort of be aware of, I guess, is first of all, the potential, if you've got your, if you're self-declaring under MDD, you will have your declaration of conformity, which says that you're in conformance with the Medical Device Directive, I guess. Whereas if you're self-declaring under the MDR, then you will be saying, I self-declare under the MDR. And there are rules as to how long, I think that you've got that transition in Europe, isn't there, as to how long you can rely on those MDD certificates. The other, what I think I have said in the past is that the main criteria for accepting CE marks onto the UK market is that CE mark has been granted under the legal system within Europe. So if you're following that European system and you're self-declaring under the European system and you're CE marking as a response to that, then presumably you can still place that product on the UK market because it's legally being placed on the European market. There are also, I think, rules, if you read them back through the documents that Steve alluded to, those MDCG documents. If you look through those, there is also restrictions on how you could potentially change your product as a result of that. I don't know, but then you'd still be self-declaring your product, wouldn't you? Yeah. Unless the classification changes. Then that's the last point that I just wanted to make, is that be careful that your product is still classified appropriately within that transition from MDD to MDR. Again, so if you're self-declaring, the classic example there is the additional class 1 requirement, because I think with the old MDD, it was just measuring and sterile product. But there's also now a new classification within class 1 within MDR, which covers reusable products. So again, if your classification going from MDD to MDR is now you're looking at a reusable product, you're going to need some sort of conformity assessment body input, which would mean you'd need new certificates. So just be aware that that classification change could actually influence how you transfer from that self-declaration system.
And you'd need to do that now, wouldn't you? If you're moving from a self-declared product, the class 1 non-sterile, non-measuring, non-reusable to a class 1 reusable, and you would already be kind of moving towards your certificate.
Yeah, and I guess we get back again to that whole question about being placed on the market. You know, if your product has been placed on the market, in general, regulations are not retrospectively applied. So if you've actually placed your product on the market, then you're still okay to move that to your customer. But again, look at those definitions very closely. And you know, I've often said to companies when I was working as a consultant, is very clearly map out your logistics, map out your distribution chain so that you know where your product is, where your definitions are for being placed on a market using the regulations and the definitions, particularly in Europe as they relate within the Blue Guide. The Blue Guide, if anybody doesn't know what the blue guide is, if you just do a Google search for medical device blue guide, it gives you a lot of help in sort of understanding those definitions within the regulations. So follow those, have a look at those, map out your distribution chain, see when and where you've placed your product on the market, and use that as your basis.
Good. Thanks very much, Phil, and Steve as well. Right. Thanks, Jack, for that question. Right. We've got another question from someone who doesn't want to say who they are regarding transition period, which follows on really. Do I understand correctly that self-declared and Article 12 MDD devices who have only declaration of conformity and no EC certificate can be placed on the market without UKCA for as long as the declaration of conformity is valid? As the DOC has no expiry date, then the devices may never have a UKCA.
So an EU declaration of conformity, yeah, which declares conformity to the EU regulations or EU directives.
Just moved. Hang on a sec. Right.
It's all right, still got it.
Got it.
Is only valid in the for that length of time. So already kind of the EU declaration of conformity to medical device directive is only valid until the end of that transition period. If you transfer that to a UK declaration of conformity under the current UK MDR, and UK MDR is based on MDD and IVDD, the same general principles, same legislation, that will only be valid until June 23. And there's a hard stop there in legislation. Unless the MHRA proposals come along and say, actually, there's an extended transition period for 3 or 5 years, if those proposals go into law, then the EU declaration of conformity, if that's a valid EU declaration of conformity, will be valid until it's no longer valid, or the 3 or 5 years, whichever is the sooner. So it's not a question of I can continue with a declaration of conformity. It's got to be either a valid EU declaration of conformity or a valid UK declaration of conformity, and only until the end of the relevant transition period, if that gets set into legislation. And
ultimately, you need a UKCA.
You will ultimately need a UKCA unless there's recognition, and there is discussion around how that recognition might happen, but that's not in any legislation at the moment.
You're talking mutual recognition, then?
Not mutual recognition, no.
Oh no,
it's not going to happen. That's not going to happen, Andrew.
One-sided recognition.
Don't you know anything about politics, Andrew?
Yeah. I've also heard various comments on that one, which are a bit gobsmacking, but we won't go into that.
Yeah. Do you believe in Santa Claus? Do you believe in Santa Claus, Andrew?
No, but the Tinkerbell, yes.
Good point.
Right. Annette's got a question here regarding UKCA marking of electrical. John keeps moving these things, or they keep adding questions. Where are we? Right. Sorry about this. Regarding UKCA marking of electrical class 2B medical devices, which set of regulation governs the first milestone to be met? Electrical regs or medical device regs? Good question. Obviously, the latter involves certification issues by an approved UK approved body. Thanks in advance. Who wants to tackle that? Bit across the board here, isn't it?
Yeah, well, I think that the medical device regulations trump the electrical ones. So, from a safety perspective, a quality, safety and performance perspective, you have to ensure that happens for your class 2B device. The electrical regulations and a lot of those sort of allied regulations is just not, it's not just electrical stuff. There's also things like chemicals, like through the ROSE directives, and waste electrical equipment stuff, and biologicals, all of those sorts of things all have different transition times as we left Europe. But I think from our discussions that we've had with government and OLS, the medical device regulations actually trump those. So you make sure that you're in compliance with the regulations, and you use the state-of-the-art sort of statements, I think. Is that about right, Steve? I mean, that's one that I haven't looked at for a while, but
I think, the things. I'm just going to say I agree with you, Phil, because I can't add to what you've said.
Right.
Yeah, the important thing about medical devices regulations is that you have patient safety at the end of it.
Yeah.
And as a manufacturer, you want to make sure that you get safe products to patients. So as those regulations change, I think that we're going to be faced, and this sounds a little bit of a get out, really, or it looks as if almost avoiding the question, but there in
like
the
a
sort of the first,
politician, you mean?
yeah, like in the first few years, as we sort of start to smooth out the transition from being a European member state to not being a European member state, I think there are going to be a number of these sorts of things where we're going to have to be pragmatic, or the MHRA are going to have to be pragmatic in the way that they approach these. And nobody's going to want to see a product not reaching a patient, which would be a patient safety issue, for the sake of a few months on a transition period. So, for some of those electrical things. So make sure that you are applying the regulations as best you can from a state-of-the-art perspective. You will undoubtedly have to explain that to a conformity assessment body. So make sure that it's documented in your quality management system very clearly and transparently, and be prepared to have that discussion.
Thanks, Phil. Thanks for that one. I guess these rules only apply to existing product, though, or would you say that a new product you'd have a similar sort of approach?
Well, even a new product, you could be in a situation where the transition for an electrical part of your product has changed before, and we've had this situation with other CE marked areas, and how that affects things like spare parts and that sort of stuff. And there's going to have to be that level of pragmatism. As I say, I think that the key is to make sure that you're as transparent as you can in your quality system. And that's throughout your quality system. It's not just sort of burying it into, a component part or whatever section of the QMS that is, but make sure that it's in things like management review documents. So, in management review, make sure that the senior management of your company knows that you have these overlaps and that you're making allowances for them. And it shows that if you do that within a QMS, it essentially shows that you are in control of the product which you're manufacturing. And that is the premise of all quality management systems. So, I would try and use that. And as I say, be prepared to have that discussion with the conformity assessment body when it comes up.
So it turns out I can't add anything to Phil's question, but Phil can add lots to Phil's question.
That's just me, Steve.
That's a first. So thanks, Annette, for the question. Right, Maria's got one here. For products that are CE marked, I think, under IVDR, one for you, I think, first, Steve, for which manufacturer only has GSPRs under IVDR, does the manufacturer need to also have essential requirements prepared in order to claim UKCA mark?
Yeah, this is good, and I think it would apply to medical devices as well, but to IVDs in a slightly different way.
Well, we'll let Phil have his say after, shall we?
Yeah.
No, I'll let you have this one, Stu.
I'll answer it, but have a think about if you want to add anything to it, Phil. So IVDR, the general safety and performance requirements, are very similar, but not the same as the IVDD essential requirements. And Maria obviously knows that very well. There are people who've done a gap analysis between the essential requirements and the GSPRs. I think NSF did a gap analysis. I know Robin Murant, when she was at NSF, did that. And I think a lot of the approved bodies undoubtedly have done some kind of mapping. So have a look at those. The UKCA mark essential requirements are based on IVDD currently. when the regulatory basis for the UK CE mark changes, when UK MDR 2002 gets updated, as it definitely will, but we don't know what it's going to be updated to just yet. They will have their own, I think they're still going to be called essential requirements, but they will be updated. And you will need to have a mapping from the essential requirements for IVDD across to the new UK MDR essential requirements. And you're probably going to have a mapping of the IVDR GSPRs to the UK MDR essential requirements. So there's a bit of a kind of a triangle there of the IVDD, the UK IVDR, and the EU IVDR, which will kind of so in other words, the short answer to your question is yes, you do need to have an essential requirements checklist in order to claim the UK CA mark, but the evidence that you're using to justify why you meet that requirement will probably be very similar, whether it's EU or UK.
Okay, thanks, Steve. Phil, do you want to add anything?
The consultation response that the MHRA published back in June made a huge nod towards European GSPRs, and Steve was being really diplomatic in sort of suggesting that, you know, there's no certainty that those GSPRs are going to be ending up in a UK requirement, but technically I don't think that there's going to be a great deal of difference. That's my way of being sort of diplomatically saying that they're going to be very, very, very similar. So I think what you're doing in Europe as far as GSPRs go is going to be almost the same as what you would do from a UK ER perspective. So I wouldn't be reaching for the gin bottle or losing sleep on sort of how I'm complying with those and that crossover, to be perfectly honest.
Right.
I'm not going to say anything about gin.
Yeah, actually, yeah, reaching for the gin bottle is just a Friday thing anyway, I guess.
Yeah, I think so. Right. Anyway, before you get to the gin bottle, Phil, we've got a question here from someone. Devices that arrive into back to the EU warehouse again now. Devices that arrive in the EU warehouse with a generic label, and the device is then subsequently labelled with the final label country language. Is this considered as placed on the market? It goes back to the first one.
Oh, wow. Now that is a really,
Subtle,
really good question.
Subtle.
I'm going to have to drag that one out of my recesses of my mind. So it's whether or not the application of that label is considered as part of the manufacturing process, isn't it?
Mm.
And what is the CE marked device? What is the fully compliant CE marked device? What
a fabulous question that is.
Mm.
I'm going to have to think about that one a little bit more, actually. Maybe that person, I know you're anonymous, but maybe you could send us a note on that one, and we'll look at that one in a little bit more detail. But the manufacturing process, quite often, as part of your QMS and as part of your control, actually includes application of a label, because your label is part of the GSPRs, or the essential requirements, as we were talking about before, and they're very carefully controlled, particularly as Steve says, to ensure that what is on the label is what is reflected within the technical documentation and the actual basis for your declaration of conformity, i.e. the CE mark that you're applying to the product. So if there is a suggestion that the label that you're then putting on your product is different from what's in your technical file, there would be a huge issue, because that would be a no-no. There are, however, things like allowances made sometimes for over-stickering, but that is really restricted, the way that you would do that, and you would only have certain circumstances where you would oversticker. And one of the things, of course, as we transition through the CA marking scheme here, that's one thing that we've also been talking to MHRA about, is, you know, the lead times for doing labelling. And if you can't do that I mean, we're less than a year away from CE marking legally at this moment in time, but you know, changing a label will take longer than a year. So if that means, okay, well, a distributor in the UK could just put another label on the thing to say that it's onto your product, to say that it's CA approved, or it matches the CA requirements, then that may be allowable. But be very careful if you're actually applying labels once they get into the warehouse, because, as I say, that could potentially be outside of the control of the manufacturer and therefore not part of that whole quality control scheme.
Good. Okay. Good.
Does that sort of make sense? Yeah.
Makes sense to me. So it makes sense to you, Steve?
Yeah, I don't think it's a product until it's a product. You know, it's not a fully compliant CE mark product until it's fully compliant CE mark product. But yeah, there's a whole load of kind of subtleties around that. There
is, yeah. Good, thanks, guys. Right, Patrick's got a question. Hi, nice to see us all. Nice to see you too, Patrick, or not in the case here. Any updates on extending transition dates beyond 1st of July 2023 for NHS labs using in-house IVDs under the health institution exemption? Steve, I think IVD, it's got your name written all over it, this one.
I don't have to do all the IVD questions.
Well, we'll let Phil have a go if he feels, so he doesn't feel out of it.
No, please.
Oh no, because this is an easy one, Phil. Shall I give you a clue as to what the answer is? The answer is no. Next question.
So there is no update. I think that's the answer for clarity.
So the MHRA proposals for extension are for CE marked products. If you're using the health institution exemption, you're not CE marking a product. It's products which are made and used within the health institution. And whilst the EU gave some transition periods that go right up to 2028 for the health institution exemption, MHRA have not proposed anything for the health extension for the health institution exemption. I'm sure that will come. I feel certain that will be there, because I think it would be unfair on UK laboratories. Yeah. However, already in Northern Ireland, they've got the exemption under the EU, but they've also got the MHRA guidance. So they've got kind of two different resources there to help them. But in GB, no guidance and no extended transition as yet.
Good, thanks. Were you happy with his answer, Phil?
Absolutely.
Good. Thank you, Patrick, for that one. Another anonymous attendee, unless it's the same person. For CE mark on the device, if an EC certificate has expired, can the product bear the CE mark be placed on the market thereafter in countries that do not require or recognise the CE mark? So this, I guess, is further afield than EU, but quite a few people recognise CE marking, don't they?
Yeah, that's a good question. Of course, you have to legally be able to comply with the directives or the regulations in order to place your product on the European market. So if that EC certificate has expired, then you can't legally do that. So you can't place it on the market. Yeah, I think that question perhaps does allude to, as you say, Andrew, what about those countries that accept
like the Middle East,
or recognise that CE mark? The best advice really is to talk first of all to your distributor, because in a lot of those countries you have to have a local agent. So I would speak to them first and sort of say, well, what does this mean? But I suspect that in a lot of instances as well, those sorts of submissions also rely on things like certificates of free sale and an assurance that the product can be legally placed on the European market. So if that is the case, I suspect you're going to be up a creek without the paddle. So to speak.
Yeah, the relevant EU competent authority will be able to issue a certificate of free sale if it's required, and it very often is for these countries accepting the CE mark. They will look to see if the product is on their register. If it's not on their register, they won't issue a certificate of free sale. No certificate of free sale, no export.
Yeah. No, I think that's a totally fair comment. Good question, though. Thank you very much to that person. Right, we've got one here, B. Chicana, whoever that is, I'm not sure, but we'll find out. For a device which is a Class 2A under EU MDR and Class 1 under EU MDD or UK MDR, can the manufacturer self-certify the device for UK CA mark and undergo notified body conformity assessment for CE mark? Good transitional question. Who wants to go with that, Phil?
That's a really involved question, actually, isn't it?
We're getting some good ones, aren't we?
Yeah. All right. So first thing to say is, if you are in fact CE marking your product as a Class 2A, and you're legally placing your product on the market in Europe, then that CE mark will be recognised in Europe, in the UK, at the moment up to that 30th of June 2023 date, but we are more than a little bit hopeful that that will be extended according to the recommendations that the MHRA made in their consultation response. So if you're CE marking, that should be fine under the MDR. Could you go to the UK conformity assessment body and ask for a CA mark? Yes, you could as a Class 1, because presumably that's what the requirements are in the UK at the moment. The caveat to that, though, of course, is that we, as we were talking about before, we're not sure as to how the essential requirements and classifications in the UK will change as a response to updating our requirements, our regulations, because they are going to be updated. There's no, that's what the whole CA marking scheme is discussing. So if, let's say, for example, in that particular instance, that your product is a Class 2A in Europe, there is more than a good chance that when those regulations are updated in the UK, it will become a Class 2A in the UK as well. So is there an advantage of getting it CA marked first? That's the question that you would have to sort of ask. If it's Class 1, though, and it's self-certified, yeah, I think that once the UK regulations change and the classification potentially updates to a 2A, which it sounds in this case that it might do, then you would have to go through the process of getting a 2A classification in the UK as well, with the UK conformity assessment order. It's a really good question, but it really depends on what you would see as a strategic advantage for self-declaring under the current UK CA marking rules. Unless there's sort of a marketing to get, a market acceptance or getting a foothold on the market, but be prepared and start pulling together all of your stuff, which it sounds as if you're already doing so as a Class 2A in Europe, and anticipating that change in the UK.
I think that's a good point. You might get away with it short term, but long term, you're probably still going to need a higher classification than in the UK.
Yeah, just have a chat. Have a chat with your notified body, and if they're also a UK approved body or they're in line to be a UK approved body, they'll have given this some thought. And I heard from Vishal Thacker at BSI UK that they've given this a lot of thought. So yes, you will be able to self-declare for the UK CA mark. You won't be able to get a notified body, or sorry, a UK approved body to look at a Class 1 device. They can't do that. When it transitions across, if it also if UK MDR also transitions it from a Class 1 to a Class 2A, which it sounds like it may well do, then the UK approved body can look at it for a certificate for a UK CA mark. But this is about the choice of your notified body. If you want to sell in the UK, can your EU notified body also act as a UK approved body? And this is what I think is something that people are really going to have to think about. Can if they wish to continue to sell in the UK and they've got an EU notified body who is not planning to be a UK approved body, and they need to have some certificates, what's the best way to do that? Do they move across to a notified body that's also a UK approved body, or do they have two separate bodies, which might be easier, which might be preferable to them? But again, there's an underlying question here about choice of notified body and approved body.
Yeah, and I'm sure we'll probably get on one of the later questions is bound to turn up on capacity within the conformity assessment bodies, but there's a lot in this question, I think, as to how you manage your relationship with that conformity assessment body. And now that we've got that schism between a European notified body and a UK conformity assessment body, that strategic question is even more acute, I think.
Yeah, would you actually go as far as recommending separate notified and conformity assessment bodies?
It depends on your portfolio and your strategy.
I would have thought, certainly in the SME world, that's the last thing you want if you can avoid it.
I wouldn't recommend one over the other, to be perfectly honest.
No, you're too diplomatic, Steve.
Well, no, not necessarily. I think that I think probably there are lots of reasons why you choose a conformity assessment body. You know, it could be geographical, it could be from a language perspective, it could be from a capacity perspective, a scope perspective. So there are lots of cost. You know, there are lots of things that you have to consider when you sort of decide on who your conformity assessment body is. I mean, we're restricted in the UK, of course, but you know,
I spoke with a medical device manufacturer on Tuesday, and they have deliberately chosen to use 4 separate EU notified bodies because they've got such a broad range of product portfolio, and one notified body has better expertise in this part of their portfolio, and another notified body has better expertise in that part of their portfolio. And they're a big company, so they can choose, but you know, it really depends on your company, on your profile, your portfolio, and your regulatory strategy. It may be one notified body stroke approved body, or it may be separate. It's entirely down to the business.
Now, just take that step forward. Does that mean you get 4 sets of audits to go with that?
Yeah, that company have given themselves a lot to chew on, you know. But they know that they've done that knowingly.
Wow.
And you know, there are. I think we've had discussions with some conformity assessment bodies, and when you do speak to them, it's interesting to pick up on the fact that we talk about trust quite a lot, actually, in our business. I'm beginning to speak a lot about trust now. And one audit report from one conformity assessment body may not necessarily be recognised by the other. So, you know, when, as Steve says, if you're a company that's got 4 of those conformity assessment bodies, you know, you're going to end up with a lot of conflicting discussions, I would imagine. You know, we all know that a conformity assessment body will have one view and another will have another view, you know. Yeah. So you know, there are, as I said when I was in Denmark this week, you know, there's more than one way to skin a cat. You know, and you know, neither answer from any of those conformity assessment bodies is wrong. It's just different, and those differences could be, as I say, anything from language, understanding, cultural. You know, like a German notified body review might be very different from a UK conformity assessment body review because of the different cultures that they live in, and that sort of stuff. You know.
Yeah, they've made a lot of work for themselves, that company. Anyway, Patrick's on again. If new clinical trials of investigational medicines using an IVD for medical purposes need to comply with the new MHRA regulatory plans after the 1st of July 2023, are there any plans to release guidelines to stakeholders as soon as possible in order to avoid any delays? That's a $64,000 question, isn't it? Do
you want me to take that one, Phil?
Yes, please.
Yeah. Yeah, we can blame you then, Steve.
First off, Patrick, mate, you have to stop asking closed questions. The answer to this one is I don't know. Let's move on. But
So you can speculate.
Also, I think Seamus Kearney did a really good presentation yesterday. I think it's still online, so from ARC consultancy. Around kind of global precision medicine trials, and I think Patrick's question is spot on. Yeah, it'd be great to have some plans around this. There's how do you regulate a product which is defined as an IVD if it's not going to be marketed, but it's going to be used on clinical trial subjects? It's never going to get a CE mark. But it needs to comply with the regulations. It's never going to be marketed as a commercial product, but it needs to comply with the regulations. So I think it's really important to get some guidance. And I think delays here. Okay, that you can rely on the transition to some extent. You can rely on the health institution exemption to some extent, but that doesn't answer all of the questions by any stretch. So the delays here could mean risk to patients. The patients don't get the therapy that they need. It also risks UK clinical research. So I think it's clear that work is needed here. It's clear that clarity is needed here. There's no opportunity to bury heads in sands and say let's ignore IVDR. Really have to grasp the nettle and publish some guidance. So Patrick, I feel your pain, mate, and I wish there was more. We'll continue to lobby for that as much as possible.
I think that's the point. Yeah, you keep pushing back and keep the dialogue going, won't you? So
absolutely.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Right, Eshwan is back on again. We have a derogation approval for one of our products and is valid until November. However, we are likely to receive the CE certification by February 2023. In this case, is it possible to apply for an extension of derogation with the UK authority? I think this probably follows on from the comment we had before, where I would say, well, they are being seen to do what they are being asked to do, to pick up Phil's point about derogation. If you look like you're making an effort, then they're more likely to be acceptable. But on the other hand, there may be a nuance here that you two want to add to.
So it's not good practice, in my view, for a competent authority to continue extending derogations. It should be a temporary derogation. We've seen through COVID that some derogations were less than temporary. So there's obviously some flex around that. And I think there's possibly a good reason to flex here, because if those products need to be available to consumers, if the company's doing everything they can to reach that, I can't see any reason why the competent authority would deny an extension of the derogation if they choose to. So yes, is it possible to apply? Definitely. Keep on that dialogue. If you're already doing everything you can, that will help to bridge the gap. Yeah.
Phil, do you want to add anything to that?
I assume that any of those sorts of extensions to derogations, there will be sort of restrictions on what that means to the company. You're not allowed to change your product at any time during that derogation, because essentially the competent authority is taking on the role of a conformity assessment body, and it's not going to be in the business of assessing change. So your product can't change. It's not an ideal situation for anybody, really. But as Steve says, if that reason for an extension is simply because the company is being faced with capacity issues within a conformity assessment body, in some ways you could argue, of course, and you wouldn't put it in your submission, but you could say that capacity is being restricted because perhaps the competent authority is not designating conformity assessment bodies quick enough. But you would never use that as an argument. But essentially, as Steve says, that route is there to be used, and if it was granted once and there is a genuine reason, just carry on asking for extensions.
Okay, I thought Steve was coming back on that one. Great, we're getting good questions. We're about halfway through our time and about halfway through the questions so far. So Patrick's got another one. I think it's probably one of your closed questions, so I'll put this at Steve just for a good measure. As the deadline of 1st of July 2023 looms over us, are there any plans to start to release either draft or full guidelines for more complex areas like companion diagnostics to stakeholders as soon as possible in order to avoid delays? So I guess no's the answer.
Well, I think I'll give a Phil Brown answer and say it depends.
There you go.
So I think the focus groups. Who knows what's going on with the focus groups? MHRA have previously proposed some focus groups, which gets a number of stakeholders together to look at areas where there's a need for guidance, and they've put in their proposals that there's where there are areas which need guidance. Those focus groups were postponed. They were postponed during a pre-election period. They were postponed, I think, when the government. I can't remember what all the different reasons.
Just to clarify, what focus groups are we talking about here? Just so clarify that.
This is if you look in the MHRA proposals, they say this will be covered in legislation, or this will be covered in guidance. Right. And all of those areas where they say this will be covered in guidance, or most of them, they plan some focus groups to get stakeholders together to talk about what. And I guess they were drafting up some guidance that they were going to put to those stakeholders to see what they thought about it, rather than ask open questions and say, what do you think we should include in the guidance? So I guess it was a bit more developed than that. Are they going to get them out to stakeholders? We haven't seen them yet. We haven't been involved in those focus groups yet. Those focus groups have not been reconvened. I'm not sure that they will be reconvened. So yeah, whether it's a complex area like companion diagnostic, or a less complex area like conformity assessment, or whatever it is, we haven't seen those yet. I think that really kind of pushes against the 1st of July 2023, makes that less manageable. But let's see what MHRA come back with. They've told us that they really want to work with us quite closely to develop these guidance documents, and I'm sure they will come good on that promise. We need to kind of be talking to them about how they can do that in a more collaborative way.
Okay. Phil, do you want to add anything to that?
No, I think we're all frustrated by the lack of progress on these sorts of focus groups. As Steve says, they were there, I think, really to try and sort out perhaps some of the content within guidance. Guidance is one of those things, isn't it, which is just as a strategic point, Andrew, we quite often sort of say, yeah, it'd be really good to have guidance. The issue with guidance is that it provides flexibility and reduces the predictability of regulation, whereas being part of the legal setup increases predictability but reduces flexibility. Yep. So you've got to get it right, and this is something which MHRA are acutely aware of. They initially had like a number of buckets that they wanted to produce guidance on. I think the process that they were proposing wasn't particularly appropriate. They were expecting huge, great big round tables, which in my experience would never have produced anything particularly meaningful. But time is running out, and as Patrick says, I think that the MHRA are going to genuinely either have to take guidance from Europe, or they're going to have to start really prioritizing the areas where there should be guidance, and maybe one of these areas which Patrick has identified is one of those. But there are others, like conformity assessment processes and classification and these very sort of high level things.
Knowing the people at MHRA who are still there, they are very, very diligent and dedicated people, very capable people. There's not enough of them, but the ones who are there are very diligent and capable, and I don't think they'll let the grass grow under their feet. And I suspect that many of them have been working very, very hard on drafting up these guidelines, and are equally frustrated at not being able to share them.
Right. Good. Okay. Thank you very much for that one, Patrick. We've got one here from, I think it's Edward Ball. Do you think we might see a divergence of what is considered the state of art between UK and the EU, or that the involvement of conformity assessment bodies that are both EU notified bodies and UK approved bodies will keep things aligned? E.g., I'm wondering whether the standard of care will be considered only for the UK, for UKCA, but broader for CE marking. Thanks, Ed.
Ed's great, and it's a wonderful question that's got so many layers in it. Ed's at RQM Plus, and you know, I think he's a
you
real...
know him then, yeah?
Oh yeah, we know Ed very well. He's a great guy. Thanks for the question, Ed. I'm going to take, Phil, if you let me, I'll take 2 points, and then you can come in. The first is on state of the art, and the second one is on standard of care. So state of the art in medicine or state of the art in technology, I think, you know, that's kind of, you know what, it's not the bleeding edge, it's not the retired products, it's the bog standards. Sorry, not bog standard. It is the good dependable products that routine right in the middle of the innovation life cycle. I think there's going to be a divergence between conformity assessment bodies. I think there's going to be a divergence within conformity assessment bodies. So it would be good to figure out how to get that consistency within notified bodies, within approved bodies, and then of course have a kind of global consistency on what is state of the art. I suspect IMDRF are going to be the people who will be able to manage that. I don't know offhand if IMDRF have any guidance documents on what is state of the art. I think it'd be really, really good if they did, because this will, and MHRA are members of IMDRF. I saw that Johan was at the Sydney meeting recently down in Australia. So hopefully there's discussions around what is needed in the future for IMDRF documents.
Are they actually members or are they observers at the moment?
I believe they're full members.
Yeah, full members.
They're members.
Yeah.
So there's that fast track then? It seemed, or has 2 years passed or whatever was it?
No, it was 2 years that they made the application. Yeah.
Wow. I thought I was looking older. Right.
And the distinction between members and observers is fairly minimal anyway. It's a cosmetic, because they're always been, whether as the EU or as UK observers or as UK members, always been very, very active in those discussions. Okay, the second one on standard of care, I think is really, really complex. Standard of care, if you're running a clinical investigation or a performance study and you're comparing your product against standard of care, you know, that's a fairly routine way of going about an investigation, going about a study. Standard of care in the UK is X. You know, the clinical pathway, if you like, is this, and then you're looking at your product separate to that to see how it stands up against standard of care. Standard of care for the UK, the practice of medicine in the UK is different to the practice of medicine in Denmark, France, Germany, Spain. France, Germany, Denmark, Spain are all in the EU, so they can claim an EU standard of care, even though they're all different. And they can say the UK is a different standard of care. Therefore, the research study, the clinical investigation, the performance study, that clinical evidence that's come out of that, you'll need some kind of bridge to be able to say that your clinical investigation, your performance study in the UK is acceptable in the EU. Or you make the case that the standard of care is identical, is the same. Which would be by far the better option, and you know, you really need to kind of tell that story and understand what standard of care is in all of those countries to be able to say it's identical. If the standard of care is different, then that's a real blow to clinical research in the UK. I think the standard of care is the same. I think the clinical evidence is the same. I think the diversity of the UK population is such that that clinical evidence will stand up in any jurisdiction. So it really needs to have something more definitive than Steve table thumping about standard of care in the UK to be able to push that across, because UK clinical research really depends on that, and the EU UK relationship is such that it's at risk.
Great, thank you very much for that, Steve. Anything to add, Phil?
Right. Steve's absolutely right. This is such a multifaceted question. Thanks, Ed. It's really good one. So first thing is that I think state of the art is defined within the standards. So you might find a definition for state of the art in 13485 or 14971. I'm not exactly sure because I haven't got the standards in front of me, but I wouldn't be surprised if to find the definitions there or in the guidance documents that sit around those standards. I don't know what they say, and I wouldn't know how to answer that question, but that's where I think I would look for the definition. The divergence question is a really, really good one, and it goes into some of the work which, as ABHI, we've been trying to foster with MHRA and government in general. When we first left Europe, of course, everybody, or all of our members said, look, we just don't want to diverge from Europe. We've got a huge market on our doorstep, so we don't want to diverge from the regulatory mechanisms that we use, because if we develop products in the UK, we want to sell them in Europe. It's an obvious thing.
Simple, yeah.
Yeah, as we've moved on a little bit, since we had that discussion, we've had a number of members and a number of people say to us, yeah, but that European system is actually creaking a little bit, isn't it? You know, there are some parts of the MDR and IVDR which is not unraveling, but it's becoming a little bit tight. It's like as you get older, your suits get a little bit tighter, don't they? You know, and it's sort of it's sort of that sort of process. Exactly. So one of the things which we've been looking at is to say, well, what happens if you have technical alignment of your regulations? That means that, you know, we were talking earlier on about general safety and performance requirements. If those are aligned, we know that technically a product between a product manufactured and developed in the UK is the same as one that's in Denmark, Spain, France, and Germany, right? Because you follow in the same general safety and performance requirements. That leaves you then with an opportunity to look at the process of regulation. Is the scope of conformity assessment bodies right? Is the use of conformity assessment bodies still correct? Should the competent authorities be doing more, or should we be relying more on post-market surveillance? Should we be looking at risk or trust-based systems rather than punitive systems that would suggest that if you do something wrong as a manufacturer, you get spanked hard? So, you know, these are the sorts of questions which you can start to try and think of strategically as a new process of regulation. And it goes then even further as to involvement of conformity assessment bodies. If the UK uses a different process, do we need the same sort of conformity assessment bodies? So these are those sorts of strategic questions, I think, that government, from a political perspective, are trying to answer with, you know, initiatives on better regulation and all of that sort of stuff, while still trying to ensure that we have that technical alignment of quality, safety, and performance. So really big strategic questions which underlie that question from Ed that we're sort of trying to get to grips with as we move not only through that 1st of July 2023 date, but 5-10 years beyond that. So really, really good question. Thanks, Ed.
So so my mutual recognition is your greater levels of trust and strategic thinking.
All right, so I'm going to answer that one straight away, Andrew. Europe doesn't do mutual recognition.
I think I've got that one.
You might think it does, but it doesn't. The CE mark is just a mark which allows movement of goods through Europe. It's not mutual recognition, right? True mutual recognition is where, like in Australia and New Zealand, where the Australian government said, do you know what, we trust what you do in New Zealand. So we know that you've got a different regulatory system, but we know that you're looking after our patients because we know the level of quality, safety, and performance you apply to your products. So they will accept goods from New Zealand and vice versa. That's true mutual recognition. I don't think we will ever get to true mutual recognition between the UK and Europe. First of all, you need trust, and there is no trust between Europe and UK at the moment. And secondly, you have to have an appropriate regulatory system. Maybe as a holy grail, if we do in fact have the same technical requirements, the European or the Commission will say, oh, you're applying the same rules that we are, you're just doing things slightly differently. Once that has been established and trust is within the system so that Commission actually know that we're doing a good job, you might have some form of mutual recognition, but at the moment, forget it.
Right, I've achieved a lot. I've had finger pointing from Phil. That's always a good thing. Right, we've got just three
fingers. Oh, I'm so sorry. I'm going to sit on my hands.
Don't worry. Now listen. Right, next we've got a couple of probably quick fire ones here because we've got 3/4 of an hour just about and 13 questions to go. Couple from Alison here. The recent consultation appears to be asking whether all MDD to MDR changes should be replicated in UK law. Is this what is likely to happen? Now, there's got to be Steve, this one, hasn't it? Yes, no answer, I think, Steve.
Yeah, it depends. So certainly that was
the answer. Come on.
that was the policy proposal in the consultation. That does seem to be kind of more or less what MHRA have proposed. So we're going to see something. They started off by saying that there's going to be no divergence from MDR and IVDR just for the sake of diverging. So any divergence would be for a reason. It's
a fair point that MHRA were heavily involved in MDR and IVDR anyway.
Absolutely, so, absolutely. I mean, people like Graham was the head negotiator for UK and a very successful one at that. And to move on to is it likely to happen? I feel that this government now. I don't think it's changed that much in terms. I think it's very business focused. It's very health focused. So I think it understands the need for protecting UK patients. It understands the need for protecting UK businesses. I'm not supporting one regime or another. I'm just saying I think this government will move towards that. And that's my personal view. To take the next one as well, Alison.
Go on the next question.
I'm definitely not going to answer that one, but I am going to.
We should actually cover what the question is. Make sure everyone's seen it. Given that both MD and IVD span low risk to high risk, and the IVDs with MD-like risks have to follow MD standards, why not merge the two?
So I would say also there are medical devices with IVD-like risks that don't have to follow IVD standards. So there's a big failing there. So diagnostic medical devices don't have what I call GSPR9, the performance characteristics, the requirements for sensitivity and specificity. And when you're looking at things like imaging, especially when that goes digital, and any AI where it's got a diagnostic function, to me, somebody's dropped it. You know, somebody forgot that medical devices can be diagnostic too, and didn't do that. So I think there are certainly if you did merge MD and IVD legislation, which is although the UK does have a single regulation, it's not really merged legislation. It is two separate ones at the moment. If you did merge it, then I would say you really need to make sure performance characteristics is in there. Biocompatibility doesn't apply to IVDs, does it? The Annex 16, the cosmetic medical devices, doesn't apply to IVDs. There's a whole load of stuff that doesn't apply to IVDs. There's a whole load of stuff that does apply to IVDs that doesn't apply to therapeutic medical devices. There's a whole load of concepts of the remoteness of the IVD from the patient. The medical devices are often very close to the patient, even in contact with the patient. IVDs are almost never in contact with the patient. That has a big effect on research and development. But I think there are kind of clear differences between the medical device industry and the IVD industry. There's some clear advantages of merging the two, and if they did, they should take into account the common areas between all diagnostic devices, common areas between all medical devices, including IVDs. There are lots of common areas. I think there's a lot of advantages to what Alison says, a lot of risks along the way. So I'm not sure I've heard anybody say that they really want to, but we are having to start in the next few years. We're going to have to start looking at what is the next regulatory regime for medical devices and IVDs. It's not going to look the same as it is today. We're still working on the medical device directives. They're still products that have been CE marked in the medical device directives, which were first put together in 1993, but probably with a common position put forward in the late 80s. Yeah. So, regulatory regimes last for decades. So we're going to have to start thinking about what are we going to do for the next decades to come, and we're going to need to do that fairly soon.
I think you kind of touched on this. Do you think the digital and software elements of these things have got the biggest impact to come on the future?
Do you know what? IVDs have been having this impact for years and years and years, and doing it in the background. I think IVDs are really sexy and really important, but now suddenly everybody's decided that digital is really sexy and really important as well. I think both. Digital has the opportunity to disrupt a little bit, and I think that's sometimes that's a really helpful disruption.
We better ask the sexy man himself, haven't we? Phil, any comment?
No, we're very unsexy in our medical device. So we walk around in brown suits with brown ties.
Oh, how very beige.
Thank you.
But of course, the MDR is a merging of the active implantable medical devices and general medical devices, and that overlap is obviously very easy to see. But as Steve says, IVDs, there are overlaps, but there are also areas of non-overlap. So I think that's sort of one of those things that really needs to be taken care of.
Right. Okay. Thank you. Right. Another anonymous question here. If a single medical device sold globally has several market versions where the versions only vary in relation to language or other aspects of the label, IFU or implant card, would we be required to have different UDI, DI for each version as a result of MHRA or other regulatory authority or UDI issuing agency rules? So unique device identification for this one, chaps. I'm assuming it's big enough to put the product on, because that's another thing.
Yeah. I mean, my view on that is that yes, you will need different UDI, DI. Because basically it's a system to ensure traceability. And if you've got those different languages and you've got all of those different potential versions, you need to be able to ensure that you are controlling those versions through that distribution chain. So different UDI, DI would be applicable. The other really interesting thing, of course, is that in Europe, the nomenclature system, which is, which you attach to UDI, DI, is the European Medical Device Nomenclature Process, which is the Italian system.
Yeah.
And in majority of the globe outside of Europe, you have GMDN, Global Medical Device Nomenclature System. So I know that there are aims to sort of harmonize and map across so that there is that sort of that general coverage, but that sort of attachment of vigilance and post-market surveillance, control of distribution and all of that sort of stuff is really ingrained within that. So I would suggest that you would probably need to have different UDI, DI type interpretations. Not one of my real strong areas, unfortunately, UDI.
Steve, anything to add to that one?
I know what UDI stands for. That's all I know about UDI. That's the limit of my knowledge.
Yeah, I'm never sure I understand what the second DI stands for, to make it a mouthful, but I'm sure
there's an addition come onto that from Ian. I don't know if you've seen that, Andrew.
Was another question, is there?
Yeah, Ian's added something to that original question from.
Oh right, okay. Do you want to, oh yeah. Would using internal coding systems to control distribution be an adequate alternative? Good question. Thanks for pointing that out, Steve.
Well, your label, I think, has to include UDI, doesn't it? UDI, DI as part of the regulation itself. So you would still need to develop that. I think from an internal quality perspective, you can put in whatever process you wish. I mean, manual systems have the potential for mistakes, the same as electronic ones, I guess. So, you know, whatever floats your boat from a quality perspective when it comes to sort of internal control processes, as long as it's written into your quality management system and your conformity assessment body are happy with the way that you're doing that, it can form part of that process.
Okay, right. Patrick's back again. Turkey/EU have a customs union agreement for notified body certified devices. What does the panel think of the likelihood of a CUA or MRA for notified bodies approved devices between the EU and Switzerland or GB? Pigs might fly is an acceptable answer. Well, that has to come to you first, doesn't it, Phil? Because you're a pigs might fly person.
Yeah, I mean, we're starting to get into areas, I guess, of things like technical barriers to trade. And, you know, if you're having that sort of same technical alignment as we were talking about before on product, potentially you can have that sort of agreement between them. But having spoken with a number of notified bodies, you know, okay, let's be frank. A notified body has to go through a really extensive procedure to be designated, and it costs them an absolute fortune to do so. So they, as part of their process, want to ensure that that is paramount, right? So next time they go for designation, they want to make sure that they get designated again. Because it's their business, right?
Yeah.
Now, if they're being told, yeah, all you have to do, though, is to recognize an approval which has come from this particular notified body, to ensure their designation, quite legitimately, they're turning around and saying, well, I want to see what the basis for that approval is, because I have my internal procedures, I have my internal reputation to think of here. So I have to make sure that the output from there is what I would expect. So you have to build up a lot of trust within that process for that to happen, I think. So yeah, you're right, Patrick, pigs might fly, but I think pragmatically, I think that there is going to end up having to be some sort of a process here, for the simple reason that the capacity and the number of conformity assessment bodies is limited and the pool of expertise is limited. Yeah. So politically, there's going to have to be something. How that will then be taken forward by the conformity assessment bodies themselves is the next question.
Yeah. Steve, anything to add there? Are your pigs flying?
Just Turkey, Switzerland and GB all have one thing in common, is that they're outside of the EU, and that's probably the only thing they have in common. Very different countries, very different cultures, very different legislation. Turkey are an applicant EU member state and have been for many years, and quite possibly will be for many years to come. Switzerland have never been part of the EU and are unlikely to ever be part of the EU. GB, UK were part of the EU and no longer are. That's a very different relationship with the EU. So each one will have some kind of customs agreement or not, according to that relationship.
Yeah. Okay. We've got a comment on the guidance documents. I think relates to your blue guide a bit, Phil. Guidance documents need guidance documents to understand guidance documents, as proposed by the MDCG for manual on borderline.
Oh, Jeff, you're so right. I mean, it's ridiculous, isn't it?
I thought it was just me and not understanding, being on the outside looking in.
No, they've now got guidance documents to explain MDCG guidance documents. They're on the MDCG website, and kind of, you know, we were already seeing kind of notified bodies being told that they have to assess people against MDCG guidance documents as soon as they're published. I've heard of one notified body who started to assess the company against a draft MDCG guidance document. And now do they have to assess people against the guidance documents for guidance documents? It's too much. It's too much. It's too swollen, I think.
I mean, I like shades of grey, but this is also an opportunity to catch yourself out in the process, isn't it?
And you know, I think we mentioned right at the beginning here when we were talking about the changes of government and all sorts of stuff like that. The recent reshuffles in the UK government is very much bound to trade and to lighter regulation, lighter touch regulation. So maybe actually as we move forward, Jeff, you know, we're going to see a system in the UK where we move away from guidance documents for guidance documents. You know, I agree with you. You know, it just adds levels of complexity, which makes it almost impossible to try and make to match. You know, and as you say, Andrew, that sort of it broadens that grey zone and reduces that predictability, and that's why lots of companies are saying, well, you know, if I can't understand what I need to do in Europe, why am I trying to do work in Europe? I'm going elsewhere. I'm taking the ball and playing somewhere else.
Yeah, it keeps the consultants busy. Let's put it that way, because no one, you're closer to what the thinking might actually be, as opposed to what the system, the guidance, and everything else says. You can read the runes, in other words.
Absolutely right. At this moment in time, Steve, you put up your contact details for Steve Lee Incorporated.
Already busy enough. Already busy enough, mate.
Yeah. Right. Anna's got a good question for you. Good morning. I'm finishing my CE Mark Class 2A in the next month with a notified body. After the ISO 13485 and CE Mark will finish, can I change the notified body for another one for the next audit? We are having some issues with the previous one. Thanks.
Right. So
this is brave. You could be charged for this one.
I know. So Anna, the grass is sometimes greener on the other side of the fence, and it's not necessarily greener on the other side of the fence, right? So think very carefully. There used to be, and I'm not sure, Steve, whether they're still in existence, there used to be rules as to why you change notified body. And, you know, the criteria are fairly fixed, you know, like the scope's not compatible all of a sudden, or they're gone out of business or whatever, you know, but there are some strict rules. You can do it.
It's quite difficult, isn't it, if you've got a major non-conformance?
Oh, of course. And we go back again to that sort of trust thing. You know, I remember some time back, I'm not going to name notified bodies because that's not my place, but one particular notified body sort of went out of business. And so a number of companies went to another notified body and said, right, okay, well, we've come from here and we now want you to look after us. And you would think that it would be a straightforward swap. But the new notified body said, oh, we know why they've gone out of business and we don't trust their output. So we're going to have to start from scratch with you. And we're going to have to start reviewing your technical documentation, your quality management system staff, and all of those sorts of things.
Audit your suppliers.
Absolutely. So again, be careful, Anna. The grass is not always greener on the other side of the fence. Be very careful how you assess that and sort of make your strategic decisions.
Right. Yeah, I feel the pain on that, actually. So, Steve, you want to add to that point?
Just to say, it's not a light decision. It's not a decision to be taken lightly to change. There are some very genuine reasons for changing notified body. This may be one of them, but the competent authorities, designating authorities, are very wary about notified body shopping. Going to the notified body you think will make your life the easiest because you have a product that wouldn't pass through other notified bodies. That's kind of seen as a bit of a no-no. So, you know, it doesn't sound like you're in that position here, Anna, and I'm not suggesting in any case that you are, but just don't do it lightly, but have it planned and talk to other notified bodies to see which one is going to suit your needs the best.
Thank you, guys. Anonymous one now. someone who joined late, but what's the confidence UKCA notified body certification, what's CAB, isn't it? Will not be, lost it again, where's it gone? Will not be required for July 2023. If you have a CE following the recent consultation response with the government, confirming their intention to legislate for an extension of the transition for recognition of CE in 3 or 5 years. I think we kind of had this one already, haven't we?
Yeah,
Just
the 3 to 5 years.
Joining late. Do you want to just fill the gap on that one?
The 3 to 5 years is not in the legislation. It's an intention, but it's not legislation as yet. The July 23, there's been no discussion around that. So that's fixed. But I don't know whether that's going to stay fixed forever.
Okay, great, thanks. Right, next one. The MHRA consultation answers state that the MHRA will have more stringent requirements on clinical equivalence for devices being the same and not similar. How will this impact legacy devices and new devices being clear divergence between UKCA and UK MDR? Good question. I think we touched on this before. You're nodding, Steve. Do you want to have a crack at this one?
Equivalence. I think MHRA have always taken a much more strict view of equivalence, and I had thought the EU was going down this road, but I think maybe the UK have become even more strict. The definition of equivalence means that the medical device, basically, it needs to be, you can compare version 1 with version 2 to some extent, but you can't convert, look at the Phil Brown medical device compared to the Andrew Davidson medical device, because you would have to have the technical files and all of the data about each one of them. You'd have to know when the update's happening, when the new versions are coming out. So it's really difficult. A clinical equivalent, of course.
So if it's an in-house job, then that's okay. If
Potentially,
it's 2 separate companies, it's a lot harder.
And don't forget that it's not just clinical equivalence; it's technical and it's biological equivalence. And just by way of a segue into IVDR, although the concept of equivalence is in IVDR, it's not defined the way it is in MDR. So it's a bit of a mess there. I'm not quite sure how MHRA will take equivalence for IVDR, but I hope that they've got the ability to think it through and think about what the consequences will be. And this is like the question earlier from Alison about when you combine if you combine IVDR and MDR, kind of concepts such as equivalence equate across between the two. No, they can't. So.
Yeah, happy with that, Phil? Or do you want to add anything?
I'm just going to point people to the webinar that we did with Camilla Fleetcroft. Actually, Camilla actually explained equivalence extremely well in that webinar. So it's worthwhile sort of having a quick look at that so that you can get that sort of understanding.
And just to remind anyone who was late there, that's under the regulatory roadmap on the ABHI website, okay, which was covered at the start. Kieran's got a question here. We have a Class C device, or IVDR now, that is still in development. We are looking to enter the UK market before the EU. What conformity assessment will apply with MHRA post 1st of July 2023? Any idea how long this review will take, and will the domestic assurance route apply? IVDR CE marking is around 9 to 12 months. Steve, I think this was your direction, isn't it?
I mean, it could apply equally to MDR to some extent. A Class C IVDR may be a self-declared IVDD, and if you were able, Karen, I'm not sure if you are, but if you were able to get your declaration of conformity to UK MDR as a self-declared IVD before July 2023, then you might be able to take advantage of that 5-year transition. It doesn't sound like you're in a position to do that. We don't know from July when the legislation will be written, and that there'll be a cooling off period after that, and then the approved bodies will need to be designated. And there may be a cooling off period after that, and then there's how long it will take the approved body to look at all of your conformity assessment. So I think I suspect that the actual assessment phase will take just as long, whether it's UK MDR or EU IVDR. I think it'll probably take about as long. That's my guess. But whether or not you can start the process off, as from the 1st of July, or whether it won't kick off until sometime after that, we're still not sure yet.
Yeah. Would you, if there was an extension of say 3 to 5 years, would you then have a better chance of getting your product on the UK market if you were taking a chance on it?
If you can get that declaration written before the 1st of July, but if you can't get that declaration written, that
wouldn't change if it was extended.
If that 1st of July date changes and goes back, then that's fine. But I'm not sure I would take a business risk on that just yet. No. I think it may happen. It may happen, but that's not. Steve saying it may happen is not good enough justification for making a punt on it.
True. Yeah, understood the point.
And the IVDR CE marking around 9 to 12 months, I think it'll be about the same, but it really depends on the expertise that your notified body or approved body has. If your EU notified body has expertise in that area and lots of capacity in that particular area, that's great. Make sure your UK approved body also has that same level of expertise and capacity for that particular product in that area. Otherwise, if you've got one assessor to do all of these kinds of products, it'll take them longer than if you have 5 assessors all working on that type of product. Yeah.
I see John's posted the equivalence link that Phil was referring to earlier on that question. There's one from Warren here now. What do you think the MHRA will develop a pathway to stimulate innovation? $1,000 question, this one. With the consensus that IVDR will be very difficult on new type of devices, etc., will you think that they will have something similar to breakthrough designation in the US? That's a big question. Phil, do you want to go at that? I know it's IVD, but we'll let you in.
Well, the MHRA, in league with the UK National Institute for Clinical Excellence, are working on a new process called IDAP, which is the Investigational Device Access Pathway. When we first started to talk about IDAP, it had a very restricted sort of scope, mainly aimed around some of the digital areas. But we understand from recent conversations that that's likely to be extended. Having said that, the definition of what an investigational device is, we don't know yet. But at least they're thinking about how that will work. It's allied to the pharma process, which is called ILAP, ILAP. But the Investigational Device Access Pathway, as a collaboration between MHRA and NICE, could be really quite exciting. What it also means, I suppose, is that in following that process, it's got an access piece to it as well. So, you're designing and developing a product, which might then have streamlined access into the NHS. So that's really quite exciting. I know we sort of originally started talking about sandboxing and all of those sorts of terms. I think they're all going to sort of roll into all of that sort of process, but look out for that. I know that that is something which is still in discussion and is being fleshed out at the moment, but it could be a big part of the UK ensuring that we're an attractive place to come and do research and that sort of stuff.
I think with the report we're producing on HealthTech coming into play here, I think things like that and a couple of other points you've raised, guys, I'll need to follow up with you afterwards, because I think there's a few regulatory elements we can put forward as recommendations, and that would seem to be one of them to me.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Thanks for that.
Can I just?
Oh, sorry, Steve. I'm just going to.
Can I just add? I know you want to get through me. I haven't got long, but first of all, is agree with Phil. Secondly, I think MHRA focus on areas of high unmet clinical need, which I think is admirable, is really good, really and right. But I don't think it should exclude other areas. I think it should also look at choice and availability and capacity. So just because there's one device on the market that does that doesn't mean to say that that's meeting all of the clinical need. So it's about, you know, you could have more than one device giving you the capacity you need to and that's more of a kind of public health perspective. The second thing is innovation is a really important part of the survey that we're running at the moment. And I don't know if John's able to put a link to the survey through. Really encourage people to take part in that survey, to give us some idea of what you think is happening in the UK health tech market at the moment.
Yeah, good point. John will put, I'm sure John will put that up. In just to give you a feel for it, through the roundtables and the surveys that we've run and CPI have run, we've got about 365 SME responses. But you know, the more we get, the better it goes, because it's a more powerful message all the time. Right, Shwana S is back again. Does UKRP details need to be present in the label of CE mark devices until the product actually has a UKCA marking? Is that a yes/no answer, chaps?
I think the answer is no. And the reason why I say no is that if you can legitimately place your product on the European market, it can be placed on the UK. On the European market, it can be placed on the UK market. And to me, that includes labeling. But then having said that, I think when it comes to registering your product with the MHRA, you actually have to register who your responsible person is in the UK. And in fact, it's generally the UK responsible person that does that registering. So there is a crossover, but I don't think that it actually has to be on the label.
Okay, great. Thanks, Joe, for your comment. Appreciate that. It's a great session. Right, Arminda, do you have any insight on timelines regarding notified bodies reviewing MDR technical files? Wow, there seems to be a delay with notified bodies reviewing technical files under MDR. We are concerned our MDD CE certs are due to expire in March 2023, and the MDR approval can take 9 to 12 months. Big of a thorny question. Steve, do you want to have a crack at this first?
I mean, really, it's mostly focused on medical devices rather than IVDs because it's about certificate expiry and you know, the transition times. Yeah, you're going to have a gap between March 23 and when you get your new certificate.
MedTech Europe have highlighted this, haven't they? It's a bit of a serious problem.
It is a serious.
70% of devices not having new certification.
It is a serious problem, especially when kind of up to 30% of SMEs don't have access to a designated notified body.
On that survey, actually, we're getting an even higher number than that, more like nearer to 40% if you take it across the range, including new companies. Okay. So yes, it's a real worry, Arminda, and I think it's something you should be actively pursuing. You know, an expired certificate has no validity. No. So if you have an expired certificate and you don't have a new MDR certificate, you know, you've got to paddle hard. And I think talking to the competent authority. I mean, if we're talking about the UK, you can talk to MHRA about what validity does that expired certificate have. You can maybe even talk to MHRA about a derogation, exceptional use authorization. And like we said earlier in the session, you know, it might not just be about you're the only product on the market. It might be that there might be more flex now about actually it's about the availability of the range of products to suit the public health need, and that might be something that you should include in your derogation application. Good point, Phil. Do you want to add anything?
Well, let's turn this into a positive opportunity, right? You know, we were talking previously about a regulatory system in Europe that is potentially creaking. This could be a symptom of the fact that the regulatory process in Europe is getting to the point where it needs to be reconsidered. And we in the UK, as a result of Brexit and as a result of the consultation and as a result of thinking about CA marking, we have the opportunity to look at that process again, something which Europe doesn't have the opportunity to do for at least 5, probably 7 years now. But maybe we have the opportunity to say, well, do you know, we are having these issues with notified bodies and delays in getting certificates and things like this. Is there a better way of managing that? So in fact, it's incumbent on all of us on the call really to sort of say, well, if we do have that opportunity, how would I do it? How would I actually, or what would be a better process for me as a company to do that? And as ABHI, we're really interested in understanding that sort of input from people, because that's where we have this crossroads opportunity, is to take these ideas to government, take these ideas to the MHRA and say, look, you do realise that Europe are having these problems with issuing certificates, and we want to try and have a new system. Do we base our system on something which we know is creaking, or do we actually have this as a suggestion of something which we could do, which would make things a little bit more appropriate and proportionate for the next sort of 10, 20 years?
Good point. Steve, do you want to add to that?
I think I started that answer off.
I think you did, yeah. Yeah, we've got another response on that one. Yeah, just picking up on where Phil was going and being opportunistic, you know, more that side of it.
Arminda asks a supplementary question.
Yeah. Thank you for your advice. Other companies have sought legal counsel on this matter. Would this be advisable?
I think that's really a decision up to you. I think if you take mine and Phil's answer in that context, you know, none of us have said you must seek legal counsel, but you know, you are in a position where you may not be able to sell your products through no fault of your own, and if that means you need to get legal advice, then you know that there's actually, I think it's probably fair to put the caveat in that we maybe should have put in at the beginning. Neither Phil nor I nor Andrew nor ABHI can give any legal advice. You shouldn't base your business plans on our opinion. It's our best available opinion. If you want legal advice, you should go and seek your own legal advice.
Just picking up on the point about the MedTech Europe work that's been done, I think there's some IVDR as well as MDR work. Has anything happened on that? Is the EU Commission looking at this in any way? If you take the European side of it, I mean, is there anything? I mean, you know, it's speculation. I appreciate that, but there was quite an intense piece of work, you know, showing that potentially products were going to be withdrawn from the market in large numbers, which would have an adverse effect on clinical treatment opportunity and even patient safety ultimately.
Yeah, it you know, it's all about patient safety. It really is. I know we're all trying to run a business, but in fact, we're only running a business to make sure that we can help treat, diagnose, and support patients, and not put them at unnecessary risk. The MedTech Europe are running an IVDR survey later on this year, but I don't think it's going to come up with anything different. I've not heard anything concrete, definitely not from the Commission, about MDR and about how that might change in the EU. But you know, there are mutterings about should that date of May 2024 change, and should that be extended for some products on a risk-based rationale. I don't know how far that conversation is going to go with the Commission. And in any case, their modus operandi is to leave everything to the 11th hour. They do not want to give any concessions to industry. They feel that industry has not worked hard enough to meet the requirements of MDR. I think that's untrue. I think that's unfair. I think industry has worked very, very hard, but the infrastructure has been working against them. Yeah.
So everyone will be getting good at filling in derogations towards the end of that, before the 11th hour, will they?
Well, do you know, if competent authorities have the capacity to do that, You know, when I saw MHRA dealing with the orphan products, when a lot of notified bodies moved across, you know, they did a fantastic job, but it took an awful lot of resource to do it.
Really? Right. Okay.
Yeah, it was quite an intense time.
Phil, do you want to add anything to that?
No, not at all.
Okay.
I have immense sympathy for the MHRA. As Steve said, at that time, I know, having spoken to people, they were working weekends, sort of flat to get things sorted. So you know.
Yeah, and as a recipient of some of those things, I appreciate that all that work that went on, as did a lot of companies. So I've seen John has posted the survey that Steve was referring to on the chat. So it's there if anyone wants to include fill that in. My suggestion would be do it quickly, and also just check you haven't done it before, because we have had one or two keen folks actually fill it in more than once, which is very nice. I think the last question on this list we've already answered, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
I think it's appeared a couple of times as a glitch. So I think we're coming to the end of the session now. I think
Andrew, can I just pick up on that last point that Arminda made? And it's a selling point for ABHI, really, I guess. As ABHI, we have as members quite a lot of senior legal companies in London who sort of think very closely about regulation. And maybe John, again, just as a sort of a footnote, could post perhaps Alison Dennis's blog, if that's not on the member side of the firewall. But Alison Dennis did a fantastic job. She's with I always get it wrong now. Is it Phil Fisher?
Taylor Wessing.
Taylor Wessing. Sorry, she was with Phil Fisher, but she's with Taylor Wessing. She's one of the leading authorities on the legal side of medical devices, and she wrote a really good blog on some of the things which Arminda was talking about. So it might be worth having a look at that. You might get some good pointers.
Is that on our site rather than on the?
I'm not sure. I'll leave that to John, actually, who's on the chat here. If he can find that and pass that on to Arminda, that would be really good, perhaps.
Okay, no, that's good advice, and yeah, and I think that's the point. You know, that ABHI are fully engaged on these things, and it's a question that the average, certainly at the SME level, you don't have legal counsel at your fingertips all the time to answer these things. But on the other hand, you have products that you still want to be able to sell, and if you can't, it's a massive change to your business, if not worse. So it's very good advice, Phil. So thanks for that. Steve, while we're talking on other things, I think you've got some. You're involved in a couple of blogs coming up soon with Elmed, I believe. So do you want to mention those?
Elemed, I think I've got about 30 seconds. I think I've got 30 seconds to say that hopefully going to be doing some interviews with Eleanor Kyria at Elemed. I'll try and post anybody who doesn't know Elemed, it's ELEMED. They get involved in a lot of regulatory areas. So I'm going to be doing a podcast, a careers podcast, and an IVDR Q&A. So if you want to sign up to that, you can get a really intense, focused look at IVDs.
Good. Thank you very much for that, Steve. Anyway, gents, thank you very much, and thank you to everyone who's participated. I think we've got through something like 27 or 28 questions, which I think is probably even more than last time, which is great. Alison's blog has just been posted on the chat, yeah, it's definitely there. It's on Taylor Wessing by the looks of things. Thank you everybody for your comments that are now coming through and on appreciating the session. I've certainly learned even more than I knew before, and that wasn't a lot, but as these guys will tell me, but it's all practical, helpful advice, and I think, you know, that's one of the benefits, that having been a member for a long time and been able to rely on these guys, they are at the end of a phone or the end of an email. And for members, that's a massive benefit when and particularly at this time of regulatory change. It's a huge issue to know what's going on, and at least, as I call it, these guys have got a bat phone to somewhere. I'm not quite sure where it goes, but they do get they do actually have at least an insight, which is probably one step further on than most SMEs, particularly the SMEs, have actually got. So it's very useful. But we appreciate your input, guys. Thanks very much. The recording will be there for those who missed certain elements of it. It'll be on the regulatory roadmap section of the ABHI website. And all it leaves me to say is thank you, everybody, for participating. And who knows, maybe we'll do another of these later on in view of the demand, because there were certainly a lot of registrations, but we'll see how we get on with that.
Great
Thank you very much.
questions. Great questions. Thank you.
Absolutely. Wonderful.